Welcome, listeners, to the NK News podcast, recorded here in Seoul on Wednesday, January 2, 2019. This is our first episode for the year, so we will be discussing New Year's celebrations in Pyongyang, the New Year address by Kim Jong Un, and what may or may not be the New Year's editorial in the Rodong Shinmun. I'm delighted to be joined today by three thought leaders and very, very sharp minds from the NK News and NK Pro staff. Oliver Hotham.
Good morning.
Dagyum Ji.
안녕하세요.
And Colin Zwirko.
Happy New Year.
So let's talk first of all about the big show that was on the massive stage in Ilsung Square in Pyongyang on New Year's Eve. Who watched it?
Yeah, I watched it live.
You watched it live? Okay, now I by the time I got the link, it had been finished for over 11 minutes, but I was able to scroll backwards and forward. It was a heck of a show, wasn't it?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't have cable, so I was trying to find something on South Korean television on YouTube, and there was just some. I've never watched South Korean television on New Year's Eve before, but there was some awards show, and it was quite boring.
Yeah.
And I didn't even mean to watch the North Korean New Year's celebrations. I just clicked to some other YouTube channel showing celebrations around the world, and it was Pyongyang, and it was really kicking off.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. Tell us a bit about what did you see on the show?
Well, so about a week before it, there were some posts online from various people in Pyongyang teasing about this New Year's concert. So I asked around, found out some information about it. I saw some pictures online, and a friend sent me some pictures. And you could see that the stage was going to be in sections, that they're going to be able to move throughout the crowd. And you could tell that it was going to be on both in the center of the square.
Right, so the stage faces in two directions, right? So you could be on any side of the stage in the audience and see something going on.
Right, so, we expected there to be fireworks and other festivities. Usually if you go on YouTube, you can see videos. It's a quite crowded event. It seems like Pyongyangites come out in masses to celebrate. But the concert component was definitely new.
Is this a long-standing tradition, Dagyum? Does Pyongyang have a tradition of putting on New Year's Eve spectacles in Kim Il-sung Square?
They usually do firework every year, but I don't see any concert in the past year, so I think it's kind of development that they held a new concert marking the new year. Yeah, and I saw the video, which lasted for about 1 hour, and the most impressed part is that the girls actually wore the very fashionable coat on the concert stage, and I was really impressed that there has been some kind of development in the fashion industry also.
And also tourists were being charged extra money to attend, weren't they, Colin? I think, as far as I understand, normally it's just something you can show up to Kim Il-sung Square and just have a few drinks and take in the celebrations. But as far as I understand, this year there was like a surcharge for tourists that wanted to attend.
Yeah, I was only able to speak to one person so far. I'm still trying to contact people since we're only a day out here, and the tour groups are still there. But I heard from one source that they were charged €10 a piece, the tourists.
Which is a bit cheaper than going to the Arirang spectacle, isn't it? So it's
I guess New Year celebrations around the world that are outdoors typically wouldn't charge people, and right. Who knows? But I don't think they were charging locals. In one sense, it's not a big deal, but in the other sense, it's a new charge for tourists.
Now, it did look quite cold up there on the stage, didn't it?
Yeah, it looks very cold.
They were all wearing coats, and
you could see their breath as they were singing. One of the reasons I never go out to the bell ringing ceremony here in Jonguns in Seoul for New Year's Eve is because I don't want to get cold.
It's quite cozy though. If you're all packed in together, I watched that on TV as well. The Jonguns thing.
Yeah,
it seemed quite nice. It wasn't too chilly.
Yeah, people in the northern hemisphere around the world are braving the temperatures to celebrate.
You guys never been there, right?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
Of course, alcohol always helps as well.
Now, what did you think of the drone show? They had I don't know how many, but they had a number of drones spelling out the numbers 2019 and also a Happy New Year in Korean. Were they inspired by Pyeongchang, perhaps the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics last year?
I think so. I counted. There were 180 drones. They're easy to count.
Nice. Okay, nice job on counting. Well,
it was more drones than they used in the mass game. So they brought out this coordinated, orchestrated drone light show for the mass games in September. And there are programs that you can download. Some of them are open source. So someone would have had to have bought the drones, and then they could probably pretty easily learn the orchestration program. But Pyeongchang was like, what was it, over 1,000 drones, and this was about just under 200, so not quite Pyeongchang levels.
Okay, but it's still it's something we hadn't seen before there. Kim Jong Un wasn't there in person, but perhaps he was watching a live feed. Do we know if this show was televised throughout North Korea on state television?
Well, as far as I know, it went out live on KCTV. So I'm assuming that quite a lot of people watched it. Those of them with televisions. I'm not quite sure how many North Koreans are sitting around on New Year's Eve watching the telly, but I'm sure it's quite a lot.
Yeah. Now, I couldn't help but notice that the year count that was used was the Western-centric 2018 and 2019. What is it in the Juche count now? Is it 107, 108, perhaps?
108.
Yeah.
I'm just interested, why did they not use that for a domestic festival? Is the Juche year count less important now? Is it diminished somehow in the Kim Jong Un era?
They don't normally celebrate the New Year's like this, and New Year is comparably not meaningful compared to other anniversary in North Korea. So I think this is a huge development that they actually ask people to gather in Kim Ilsung Square and held a concert marking the New Year.
Right. Well, that's New Year's as a day, but I'm talking about the year number itself. Choosing to use 2019 instead of 108. That itself is perhaps an interesting choice. I mean, when you look at books from North Korea, the publication date on the front will give you the year in both the Juche count and the Western count.
There was another big state-sponsored celebration on New Year's Eve. It's the children's concert indoors.
Right, this is one that a lot of foreign diplomats went to this show, right?
Yeah, and on the stage there, you've only got the year Juche 108.
Now that's interesting. Okay, so for one celebration, the sort of official indoors one, they used the Juche year 108, but for the outdoor celebration, Kim Ilsung Square, where the tourists were at, they used the Western year count.
Maybe they were conscious that the celebration in Kim Il-sung Square would get a bit more international attention than it was being broadcast live. There were a lot of foreigners there. I got the sense that they maybe wanted it to have the appearance of something that might happen in Seoul. You know, there was a lot of... one of the things that really was remarkable was during the concert, all of the North Koreans holding up their mobile phones to film, which really reminded me of something that might go down in South Korea.
And is it my imagination, or did I see some people in the crowd in Kim Il-sung Square holding up those inflated clapper things that people hold at the sports shows here, sports matches here in Korea?
I think Pyongyang really want to showcase that they are normal states, and they really want to display this show to the external world, not for the internal purpose. Right.
I did see some snatches of that footage, for example, on BBC. Here's a wrap up of New Year's Eve around the world, and that went through various countries. And here's a little bit from Pyongyang. So that is part of that global spectacle, isn't it?
Another thing is that if people are watching from around the world, sure, all the lyrics to all the songs were very North Korean, but they weren't broadcasting any images of Kim Jong Un or Kim Il Sung in the show itself. So international viewers would get the sense that this is a modern concert in a foreign language.
And were there any messages in the shows or in the performances? Anything about prosperity or nuclear missiles?
There was no clear message from my understanding, but it looks like musical performance compared to like Western performance. So I was really surprised that there was no message about how North Korea is great or the leader's achievement this year. So I think it clearly targets the Western tourists or people from the outside of the world.
Okay, well, in that case, perhaps it makes sense to charge a bit of money to the Western tourists there because the show is perhaps partly for them. All right, so speaking of aesthetics and big shows, let's talk about the beginning of the video for Kim Jong Un's New Year's Day speech, which was broadcast yesterday morning. It was, for me, I don't know how it was for you, but I found the beginning a little bit eerie with the noise of the artificial gong and then the the camera shot flying into the presidential palace that looked like it was filmed on a drone. Speaking of drones, we've got a drone once again.
I was under the impression that bit was computer animated.
No, that was a drone shot for sure. They've been using that drone all the time recently.
I don't know. If you look back on the video, it looked very weird.
Yeah.
No, because it was tilted a little bit.
Because there was the clock bit, and that was real.
Well, let's come back to the clock later on.
Yeah, but then there was this bit, where it flew into the Workers' Party headquarters.
Yeah, well, just up to the entrance, not into.
I mean, listeners, I guess, can have a look and judge for themselves. I thought it definitely looked a bit.
That was a drone shot.
Yeah, I used to edit video of KZU's New Year's bits in the past, and I just realized that it's really new format and style compared to the previous year.
Well, we had one of our friends, Curtis Melvin, remarked that it reminded him of The Shining.
Absolutely spot on. I watched it again after he said that, and it's absolutely spot on. It's so eerie. And then they continue the gongs.
That gong is eerie.
Yeah, really.
It's very ominous. And then when Kim Jong Un's walking down the hallway, they continue with the gongs, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's certainly in terms of a spectacle, it is interesting. Has Kim Jong Un done these speeches every year since the beginning of his rule, with the first one being January 1st, 2012? Or is this a new thing?
It wasn't 2012, it was 2013.
Yeah.
I think because the idea was January 1st, 2012 would have been just a few weeks after his father
within
died.
the morning period.
As far as I understand, this was obviously a long tradition under Kim Il-sung, but Kim Jong-il put an end to it.
Right, he wasn't a public speaker.
He wasn't a public speaker, so they replaced it with these kind of triple editorials in all the the party, military newspapers. And I think Kim Jong-un was part of his kind of early attempts to maybe bring back the spirit of his grandfather a little bit. And they've become, I guess, something of a tradition under his mantle.
And we had the fake applause, of course, at the beginning. Well, not fake, but canned applause. And canned applause at the end.
Luckily, there wasn't canned laughter.
That is a good thing. Now, who was accompanying Kim Jong-un through the halls of the palace to the room where he made the speech?
He was accompanied by 3 high-ranking officers, including his sister Kim Yo-jong, and the other 2 are Cho Young-won and Kim Chang-son. Kim Chang-son is normally known as the secretary of Kim Jong-un, and Cho Young-won is in charge of economic part, and he usually accompanied Kim Jong-un's inspection to economic units.
Okay, all right. So that's an interesting a trio of people to accompany him. Now, usually he's done these speeches before standing at a lectern, but this time he chose to do it sitting on a well-upholstered leather couch in a library or a study-type room, flanked by massive portraits of his father Kim Jong-il and his grandfather Kim Il-sung, and also flags of the state and also the Korean Workers' Party. Is there any meaning that we should take from that?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the New Year's celebrations, that it's much more of an attempt to make North Korea appear to be a normal country, right? So I was watching South Korean news last night, and they were comparing it to the old fireside chats that British prime ministers used to do. You used to get, say, Harold Macmillan sitting by a fire in a big cozy chair, talking to the people about the budget, and it definitely had that kind of vibe to it. There was also a lot of speculation that one of the reasons why is that Kim Jong-un is not maybe in the best health, and past years have seen him standing in a lectern delivering the lecture, and maybe this year he wasn't feeling up to standing for 30 minutes.
Right, because it's about a 30-minute speech.
Yeah.
As I said, seated in an armchair. He didn't look directly at the camera, but sort of looked at an invisible, sort of imaginary interlocutor. A lot of books there on the bookshelf. Has anyone zoomed in to see what the titles were?
I'm assuming it's the collected works of various people.
With the Century by Kim Il-sung, I imagine.
The Century.
But this is videotaped video, so I don't think Kim Jong-un doesn't have to be stand for 30 minutes. And I think there may be another reason that he was delivering speech while sitting down. And my Spanish friend watched it, and it looks like Spanish king delivered the speech on the New Year. So I think Kim Jong-un may want to mimic Western style.
Yeah, it reminded me. I watched the Queen's speech on Christmas Day, and it did remind me of that a little bit as well. The Queen just sort of sitting in a comfy chair, the golden piano behind her. But I think it was Rudiger Frank pointed out that some eagle-eyed viewers noticed that the clock changed quite a lot, and which actually suggested...
there's a clock on the desk in the background behind Kim Jong Un, and if you look at the face, sometimes the face is not even visible, right? Somebody's gone through and retouched that out.
Yeah, but I think someone put it together and worked out that there was some 20 minutes that had been apparently cut out from the speech.
A missing 20 minutes.
Yeah, so maybe it was probably much longer than the one we saw. The one we saw was about 31 minutes, and that would make it roughly 50 minutes.
Or he had a break in between for a cigarette.
Or a cigarette break, that's true.
Or he's borrowing from Nixon's playbook, perhaps. Colin.
How so?
What, because there was the missing 18 minutes from the Nixon White House tapes. The Watergate. Anyway, a bit of history there. What are the major themes of Kim Jong Un's speech?
So I think it's safe to say a lot of people have said the main audience for the New Year's speech is obviously the domestic audience. And I think that was quite clear just in the heavy focus on the economy, you know. All the stuff about diplomacy and sanctions got the headlines, but when we were watching it, it was really just economy, focus on, which traditionally does happen in the North Korean leader's speech. He talked about all the industries that are going to receive priority and resources this year. There was a heavy focus on electricity, as our analyst Peter Ward pointed out. Definitely an awareness that they still have these lingering power problems, talking about diversifying energy sources. There was talk of nuclear, wind, and
tide power.
Yeah, there was tide power, coal mining.
But it said developing it said pushing forward with our ability to develop nuclear power or something like that.
And then a lot of focus on heavy industry. Markedly not that much discussion of the consumer goods industry, which is odd because for most of 2018 it was quite a heavy focus of Kim Jong Un's. But that maybe suggests that these are the industries that are really the ones that receive 100% state kind of direction and don't have a degree of autonomy.
Right. What was his message to the citizens of North Korea? Was it that you need to tighten your belts, or you're going to have a bountiful year?
Basically, Kim Jong Un want to build socialist construction and reality of sanctions and pressure from the outside of the world. And Kim Jong Un actually announced a new strategic line at the April meetings. So I think Kim really want to push ahead with a new strategic line, as he believed that he achieved the Pyongyang line successfully. So through these new years, I think Kim Jong Un will really push for the new strategic line, mainly focus on economic development to make socialist construction. Yeah.
So would an average North Korean citizen, after hearing this speech, would he or she be encouraged and cheerful about the year ahead?
If I am a North Korean, I will be encouraged. But in a way, I also notice Kim Jong-un's concern about economic development and openness. Through the New Year's speech, I realized that Kim Jong-un also want to develop national economy, but he is really concerned about how he can develop its national economy. He understands that he should open the economy, but he also emphasized that there has been no corruptions and other stuff from the Western country. So, in a way, Kim Jong-un really want to develop its economy, but he couldn't figure out what is the most efficient way to develop such an isolated country.
I see. Did he make any specific mention of external investment into North Korea or North-South economic cooperation?
Notably, Kim Jong-un said he will open Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mountain Gyeongang Tourism without any precondition and in return for nothing. So this is clearly notable part that we have to focus on in his new speech, and this clearly target to audience. One is the South Korean people. Kim Jong Un want to send messages to South Korean people that we want to open market and we want to develop inter-Korean economic cooperation. So let's work together. And the other audience is the U.S. maybe. And Kim Jong Un clearly sent message to U.S. that we want to really open the market and build inter-Korean economic cooperation. So please religious sanctions. Yeah.
Okay, Colin, what did you take away from the speech?
Well, I was going to ask Dagyum, in previous years in South Korea, is the whole speech broadcast on television like it was on, I don't know how many channels this year?
Usually Yonhap and agency broadcast Kim Jong Un's New Year's speech in real time, and like other significant events, including military parade.
Speaking of the message to the outside world, he said that he's ready to talk to the Americans at any time. And that he hopes that things will go well. But he mentions a possible new way, a new way for peace if things don't turn out the way that he's hoping. What's he talking about there, Oliver?
So this was a reiteration of a line that the North Koreans have been kind of developing over the last couple of months, where they've said, well, painting themselves as having given loads of concessions at this point now and are kind of getting a little bit tired and a little bit impatient with America's, as they describe them, unilateral demands. So North Korea has now been saying, well, if we don't start to see results from the Americans, we're going to go our own way. And they're always keeping it ambiguous about what this means, but sometimes they offer hints. They've offered hints about maybe we'll have to return to what they describe as like the worst nuclear war state on the peninsula. So I think this new way could potentially involve probably a restarting of the kind of regular missile and nuclear testing that we saw last year. Kind of an end to any kind of diplomatic relations, small as they may be with the United States. It would be interesting to see in that type of scenario what would happen with South Korea. Would North Korea kind of go back to what they were doing in 2017, where they just completely blindsided South Korea and didn't engage in anything? Would that, if in this scenario, would that involve them cutting off relations with the South again, or would we see a kind of weird parallel development of inter-Korean relations improving while building up tensions with the US? And of course that would be very, very complicated and difficult.
I think North Korea itself proved that they can act rationally in the last year, in 2018. So I don't think North Korea made really stupid decisions at this point, because everyone knows that North Korea could be rational. So Kim Jong Un, I don't think Kim Jong Un finds a new way now. So I think North Korea is trying to find a new way to persuade the U.S. and I don't think the North Korea itself doesn't have any answer. Yeah.
And as far as something towards the U.S., some people might consider it parsing words, but he did say we will not make, test. What did he say? We will not make, test, proliferate nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And him saying make, now that's kind of ambiguous in itself. We don't know if that means producing finished weapons or developing the technology. But some people might see that as a new statement from Kim Jong Un. So that might be something to the U.S., like, hey, we're not making nuclear weapons anymore. You guys have been asking for that, and here it is. But that has to be proven and probably has to be said again in negotiations with the U.S.
Worth keeping an eye on whether or not they reiterate that line, because that is if anything, a new dimension to what North Korea is claiming to have done. Because for a long time they've been saying, well, our main concession has been that we've stopped missile testing,
right,
and that we've refocused our economy. But the claim that we're no longer developing nuclear weapons is actually kind of...
Don't know if it was developing. It was like to make.
Yeah.
We have to point out that this is the first time that Kim Jong Un actually make mention the word of complete nuclearizations in his speech. And usually, South Korean President Moon Jae-in delivered the word on behalf of Kim Jong Un, and Kim Jong Un himself now made mention of complete denuclearization in front of all people, all North Koreans. So this is quite interesting development.
That is an interesting step, isn't it? Now let's be careful here. You mentioned, Oliver, that the primary audience for these speeches is a domestic one, and Sokil Park, our good friend from Link and recent podcast guest, and now recipient of the Member of the British Empire Award.
Congratulations, Sokil.
Sokil Park, MBE. He tweeted on December 31st the sentence, "The New Year's speech primary audience is domestic," and he tweeted it like almost like writing lines at school. It was like 5 times, just to really hammer home that point there. And this is perhaps because of the tendency of people in Washington and Seoul to try to derive too much meaning from it. Is there a danger? I mean, are we looking too much into messages he might be trying to give the outside world?
I think it's unavoidable that people are going to read a lot into the New Year's speech, just because the last 2 New Year's speeches, I mean, I wrote an analysis for NK Pro kind of looking at, I looked at the 2017 speech and the 2018 speech and then compared them to the things that happened during the year. And, as much as we could definitely say that the speech's audience is domestic, the speech really does serve as a very good indicator of what's going to happen during the year. So the 2017 speech was very much focused on this pledge about achieving a nuclear deterrent and achieving a nuclear weapon that could hit the United States. And of course, that year was defined by fire and fury, very high tensions, lots of missile testing. In contrast, 2018 was quite conciliatory. It was, I guess, the main headline that came out of it was that North Korea would participate in the Pyeongchang Olympics. And of course, the Pyeongchang Olympics was kind of got the ball rolling on pretty much everything that's happened since then. So I think it makes sense that people would try and take it apart, But as we said again, a lot of the speech, especially the front end of the speech, was dominated by domestic issues. It was all about the economy. It was all about thank you to these people for achieving this. Thank you to these people for achieving this. But I mean, people are going to pore over every public speech by Kim Jong Un anyway, right?
Right. So, and in fact, I mean, he knows, of course, that people outside are watching it too. So maybe the speech is written with an eye to both audiences, the domestic and the international one.
Well, I mean, it's not like policy in North Korea is massively driven by public opinion, is it?
No. Now let's turn to the Rodong Shinmun newspaper. There has been a long-standing tradition of publishing New Year's editorials in, you mentioned 3 papers there, the Rodong and 2 other ones, but that seems to have fallen by the wayside in the Kim Jong Un era, that the focus now is more on the speeches rather than the triple editorials. Was there an editorial this year?
I read the Rodong Shinmun yesterday, but we couldn't get the PDF file because North Korea decided to charge the services, and we are working on a client. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether they carry the editorial on the printed editions, but on the online version there has been no specific editorial praising Kim Jong Un's New Year speech. But my understanding is that all the media will start publish editorial from today to encourage people to achieve Kim Jong Un's New Year speech. And I think January will be full of the editorial encouraging North Korean to follow the Kim Jong Un's instruction.
Okay, so it's a reinforcement of what Kim Jong Un said, and an exhortation to the people to work hard to achieve these goals.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, it's well known that in North Korea, citizens are encouraged to memorize tracts of the speech. There's quotes from the speech become a part of propaganda that you see on the street. These quotes, even Kim Jong Un in the speech said, we should focus on this slogan and this slogan and this slogan, just reminding people to kind of memorize these things and sort of commit them to memory to be good citizens.
Don't they have to?
I mean, we don't have to do it, but we did it, right?
So for the Saturday study sessions that
exactly,
we can imagine that people will be reciting pieces of the speech.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to North Korea, you can talk to North Koreans and they'll be able to recite from memory little bits of the speeches. So
now, given that's pretty much all we can say about the Rodong Shinmun at this stage, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so what, if any, conclusions can we draw from all of this regarding Kim Jong Un's negotiating positions vis-a-vis North Korea and the United States at the start of the year?
I think there was a lot of expectation that either one of 2 things was going to happen in the speech. Either Kim Jong Un was going to come out with a very hardline speech and say, essentially, throw a spanner in the works and say, this is our position, we're not going to budge. Then the other position idea was that Kim Jong Un would essentially be very conciliatory and be very kind of, almost sort of begging for negotiations to improve. Essentially what he did as a true Marxist, he took the thesis, the antithesis, and he combined the two, and he did essentially something in the middle. He said, look, we want peace with the US, we're open to it, we, praising all the progress that's been made with South Korea. But at the end of the day, he just reiterated what they've been saying for the last few months, which is that we want sanctions relief. We want to be treated as equal partners. It doesn't change all that much at the end of the day.
And certainly, the reopening of Kaesong and Kumgang Tourist Park, these things would not be possible without sanctions relief. Right?
No.
So he wants that very, very much up front, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think for a while the North Koreans were being very kind of coy about, we want concessions, but not really being that clear about what it was that they wanted. But now they've made it very clear that sanctions relief is the main demand. And I think in the coming months, either we'll have to see some kind of loosening of sanctions or these negotiations are just going to completely fall apart.
Now, it's interesting, speaking of sanctions, that during the speech he also made a point that look how the North Korean economy has grown even under the tightest of sanctions, right? So on the one hand, he's almost saying sanctions haven't held us back, but now he's saying, but we've reached the limit of how far we can go. Now sanctions are holding us back. We want relief. Is that sort of how you interpret it?
The fact that Kim Jong Un mentioned sanctions several times means that sanctions actually works. So Kim Jong Un himself proved that sanctions work and asking the U.S. to relieve sanctions. So I think sanctions clearly works in the North Korea. Yeah. So he wrapped up his speech that we have to develop national economy regardless of sanctions. Yeah, and I realized that sanctions really works in North Korea. Yeah.
Now, if a second summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim goes ahead early this year, as may or may not be the case, do you imagine that there'd be some sanctions relief that there'd be a potential for sanctions relief in those negotiations? Colin, what do you think?
I think that Trump will try to offer things. He's got his own situation domestically that people should remember in terms of what he can actually offer Kim Jong Un realistically. But you always have to look back at the legislation in the U.S. It's going to take Congress, I think, to lift some of these sanctions. There are stipulations about there must be some progress on the human rights issue. I think I've read somewhere that the president might have some loopholes in there. But really, I think we're going to have to look to what Trump can actually realistically accomplish.
Important to bear in mind is that though a lot of those limits are partially on American unilateral sanctions on North Korea, but there's also elements of saying international sanctions. But I think all that sanctions relief would require at this point would be for the US to say, okay, we don't have to have full removal of sanctions as well, which is what a lot of those laws say, that for sanctions to be 100% lifted. I can't imagine that's going to happen anytime soon. But you could have some kind of rollback of sectoral measures, for example, or there was a lot of talk about maybe lifting the travel ban, making humanitarian delivery easier, giving some concessions to South Korea as well. It could be done simply through exemptions. It wouldn't even have to be at the Security Council, a full removal. You could say, well, let the South Koreans have reopened Kaesong, Kumgang, all of that stuff. That would represent some kind of sanctions relief at least.
Now, South Korea also has some unilateral sanctions of its own, doesn't it? The I can never remember the date, the May 24th measures. Thank you. Yeah. Were they mentioned? I mean, does North Korea pressure South Korea to immediately raise or roll back those sanctions?
Since last year, North Korea asked South Korea to lift May 24th measures through all the state media, and because it really hampered the inter-Korean economic cooperation. So I think Pyongyang clearly wants South Korea to lift military sanctions.
Seoul even has had to grant exemptions. So a lot of people will say, well, May 24 measures aren't really enforced anymore under the new administration. But that's not really true, because they had to give an exemption to allow the Moranbong 72, which were on the boat when it came with the
Mangyongbong.
Mangyongbong. That's
Yeah.
it.
Moranbong's the band.
Moranbong's the band that was on the boat,
amongst other things. Yeah.
But no, I think those things do hamper inter-Korean exchange. And there was this whole drama. I think it was in November when Minister Kang was quoted as suggesting that they would lift them, and then they had to say we're not going to lift them. And
right, so they're still in place. Now we know that on almost the last day of the year, I think it was Sunday the 30th, Moon Jae-in received a letter from Kim Jong Un.
Yeah.
What do we know about this? How much has been revealed of the contents of that letter?
The Blue said they didn't want to share the details with the press because that's against the custom, and because it's clearly Kim Jong Un's private letter to Moon Jae-in. And I get the and presidential spokesperson Kim Woo-kyum held a news briefing on the letter and shared some part of the letter. And Kim Jong-un originally want Moon Jae-in to have a meeting on the frequent basis next year.
And
he also this year. And he also expressed disappointment for not making his promise to come to Seoul last year. So that's the two key points in the letter. But we don't know how it delivered.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, we don't know through what channel was it just handed over the military demarcation line?
Yeah,
but was it sent by fax? We just don't know.
But one of the journalists at local media went for his private trip, and he saw a lot of police car near the Panmunjom and near the border. So we guess that maybe they delivered a letter through the border line.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? We're, of course, once again, we are so far from where we were a year ago, right? I mean, a year ago we were just talking about Kim Jong Un making some reconciliatory noises in his in his New Year's Day speech of 2018, and now here we are a year later, and we're talking about such different things. It's amazing, isn't it? How far we've come.
A lot has changed, definitely.
But it's not. These are things that could be rolled back very quickly, right? I mean, we certainly, if the wheel turns a bit further, we could go back to, facing off across the border once again, and angry words and sea of fire and that kind of thing. I mean, we've seen this before, haven't we?
Well, on the inter-Korean level, there's a lot of arguments that these things are irreversible. I mean, a lot of the military developments are quite difficult. You can't go and just put landmines back in the DMZ or rebuild the guard towers. I mean, I guess you could rebuild the guard towers, but it would be quite a lot of work. So I think you can say on the inter-Korean level, there's been a lot of stuff that would be difficult to just snap back. But yeah, on the US level, of course, we could go back to fire and fury tomorrow. After all Trump would have to do is press tweet, and we'd be back.
Yeah, the first half of this year is very significant in the sense I don't think there has been no difference in terms of inter-Korean relations, because like Kim Jong-un said, military agreement is de facto non-aggression pact, and so I don't think we can just revert things quickly. But in terms of U.S. and DPRK relations, I think they can just go back to the past if there is no development, and if they can reduce the difference between the two over what sanction means, what humanitarian aid means. So
what denuclearization means.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for both to reduce the gap in the half of this year.
All right. Well, any final thoughts or comments to leave us with, Colin?
I think just watch out for the next Trump-Kim summit.
We're taking bets on where it's going to be.
Well, how soon could it potentially be? Let's say it does go ahead. What are we talking here?
Maybe March?
This month? So it wouldn't be this month then.
I think there's a lot of... Nothing really happens in North Korea in January. It's a lot of housekeeping, and then February...
February's the birthday of Kim Jong-il.
Yeah, and then so maybe March, I think, when it's a little bit warmer.
Between the two birthdays.
Between the two birthdays. I guess now we're open to speculation on where it might be. Maybe Switzerland this time?
Dagyum, what's your feeling on when and where?
Maybe in March or April, but it will never happen in a way. So yeah, I met quite some experts during my holiday, and some South Korean experts really are skeptical about the development. So some believe that the second DPRK US summit will never take place, and we can go back to the past. Yeah, while Kim Jong Un and President Trump share rhetorics, through Twitter or like state media.
Wow.
I think if Trump wants it to happen, it'll happen.
Yeah.
I think it could be sooner than that. I mean, if Pompeo's not making any headway, seemingly, then it's going to take a leader level summit, and I think that's going to come sooner than March.
I think a Seoul summit, if Kim met Moon in Seoul, which I think is likely to happen now at some point in the coming months, I think that would kind of help kickstart the process. And I mean, we saw Trump after the March Inter-Korean summit, the publicity that got and the international news coverage that got, that really, I think, got Trump going and kind of hyped for his own summit with Kim Jong Un. Maybe we'll see a similar thing
But
again.
Kim Jong Un needs to meet Xi Jinping and Putin. Yeah, so I think we have to.
Why does he need to meet Xi Jinping again? He's met him 3 times already.
Xi Jinping promised that he will travel to Pyongyang, and it has been delayed for a long time.
Okay.
And Russia also want to meet Kim Jong Un, and Russia want Kim Jong Un to fly to Moscow. So I think Kim Jong Un should figure out his schedule. Yeah.
He's got a busy travel schedule for the first half of the year.
Yeah,
potentially.
before meeting Trump. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you to Oliver, Dagyum, and Colin for joining me today here on the 2nd of January. And thanks to all of our listeners for listening. And, of course, as always, thanks to producers Arias Dare and Christina Lee for their hard work on this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to share this podcast with your friends and enemies, and also send us reviews, feedback, and suggestions. We can be reached on Facebook, and also we have an email address, podcast@nknews.org. Thanks for listening again next time.